The story begins with Harold, our main character, happily strolling back home, leaving others to wonder what had put a spring in his step. It turned out Harold had finally achieved his dream of owning a house. In the next scene, we find him kneeling in front of his now burning home, tears streaming down his face as he watches it crumble to rubble. The following day, Harold trudged through the town streets with a heavy heart, feeling like nothing mattered anymore. He couldn't help but ponder what had led to his misfortune, speculating that perhaps a random arsonist from town had started the fire. He wished the arsonist had picked a different house instead of his. As he walked, Harold overheard some men discussing a magic sword they had found in a labyrinth's treasure room. He remembered hearing that people could make a lot of money exploring labyrinths. However, Harold knew that wouldn't help him much since he lacked talent in magic and sword fighting and his abilities were just average. He was simply a regular guy in his 20s who had worked hard to achieve his dreams. He sighed, wishing for a fortune that could ease his worries about his burnt-down house. He then wondered how much he had left in his savings. Harold went to the bank and discovered he only had 150,000 rubes left, which was just a month's worth of pay from his basic manual labor job. In addition to his regular job, Harold had taken on side gigs and even spent time gathering mountain vegetables and herbs to sell or cook with. He had saved up over 20 million rubes, but it had all gone towards building his dream house. He felt like everything that had happened was the worst. Harold had decided to withdraw everything from his savings. He didn't have much left, so he made up his mind to spend it, even though he knew it wasn't a wise choice. He debated whether to splurge on something expensive to eat or try his luck at gambling. Suddenly, he noticed a sign for a slave auction at a nearby store. Harold had heard about the slave trade before, but it wasn't something he encountered often. A man standing outside the store approached Harold and asked if he was interested in bidding on one of their slaves. Harold explained that he didn't have much money, as slaves usually cost around 2 million at minimum. The man assured him they had slaves available at cheaper prices, with no other bidders. Intrigued, Harold decided to take a look inside the auction hall. Once inside, Harold realized he had only been called in by the man to make the bidders excited to see a full house. The auction began, with the man introducing their traveling merchant group and expressing hope that they would satisfy their guests. Considering that the merchants traveled, Harold thought maybe he could travel too, since he had lost his house. After explaining the bidding process, the man started the auction by bringing out someone who shocked Harold and everyone else: a rare forest elf being sold as a slave. The auctioneer highlighted the elf's skills in archery, magic, and elvish language, setting the starting bid at 20 million. Bidders quickly drove the price up, with Harold astonished to hear bids in the hundreds of millions of rubes. Eventually, a man in armor won the bid for the elf. Harold couldn't deny the beauty and exoticism of the slaves, but he was culture shocked by the staggering amounts of money being spent. More slaves of different races continued to be brought out and sold, leaving Harold feeling dizzy from all the fluctuating bid amounts. Afterward, the final slave for bidding was brought out. Harold's eyes widened out of shock as he scanned the girl's appearance. Everyone fell silent as they saw a dark elf being presented as a product in the auction. Everyone anxiously looked and whispered at each other, since getting involved with a dark elf meant bad news. The auctioneer was confused seeing their reactions. Harold fully understood why the bidders were acting wary, since it was widely known on the continent that dark elves always brought trouble to someone. Since they were rarer than normal elves, dark elves were not well known by the majority. The bidders continued talking about grim incidents related to dark elves recently. The auctioneer anxiously highlighted that the dark elf was still young, could use magic, was experienced in venturing into labyrinths, could do housework, and how pure she was. However, there was no response from the audience. The auctioneer exclaimed that dark elves were known to bring good fortune in another continent. Harold assumed that they chose the dark elf for the finale, not knowing how their continent perceived dark elves. The auctioneer was in a panic and set the bidding amount for the dark elf at 150,000 rubes. Harold felt impressed that the auctioneer didn't give up and had a sudden realization upon hearing the amount. The auctioneer seemed anxious when no one bid until someone finally raised their hand. All eyes turned to Harold and people called him crazy. The dark elf sensed something when she saw Harold. Harold hadn't planned to spend anything, but he found the situation strangely coincidental. He wasn't biased against dark elves and he didn't have anything to lose anymore. The auctioneer felt relieved when no one else bid, so he had to end the bidding at 150,000 rubes. Shortly after, Harold went to finalize the payment and the auctioneer called him lucky to acquire a dark elf that typically sold for billions on another continent. Harold was shocked and worried the auctioneer might cancel the transaction. However, the auctioneer assured him that trust was important in business and just considered Harold lucky for hitting the jackpot. The auctioneer then handed over the dark elf to Harold and asked him to drop a drop of blood on the slave collar. This action would make the collar recognize him as the master. The collar of subordination was designed to eject long spikes if the slave dared to harm its master, and only the master could remove the collar. Harold nervously placed the collar on the dark elf and they exchanged greetings. Harold then asked for her name, and the dark elf introduced herself as Adi. Harold found her name sweet. Adi suddenly became dazed, and Harold wondered if something was wrong. Flustered, she claimed it was nothing and turned away, feeling relieved that her master seemed kind. Despite losing everything when his house burned down, Harold managed to acquire a dark elf slave. Harold went out using his outerwear to shield Adi from the cold. They encountered the elf they'd met before, who looked disgusted at Adi. She apologized, explaining that elves and dark elves don't usually get along. Harold understood it wasn't personal, just a racial thing. He wondered what to do since he didn't have a home to go back to. He told Adi about his burnt house and lack of money, but he mentioned an abandoned cabin nearby where they could stay for the night. Adi agreed. Harold noticed Adi's attire and realized she needed clothes, but he didn't have money to buy any. He promised to figure something out. As he said those words, he felt a sense of hope returning after giving up when he lost his house. He asked Adi if she needed anything, and she requested armor and weapons. Knowing they were short on cash, she suggested exploring the labyrinth. She reminded Harold that she was skilled at navigating labyrinths and recalled rumors of treasure rooms in them. Adi explained that finding a regular job was tough for her due to people's biases against dark elves. She demonstrated her skill by throwing a rock and hitting a bird out of the sky. Harold was shocked. Adi was disappointed with just one bird and claimed she could take down 3 at once with a gun or bow. Harold remembered Adi's knowledge of magic and realized they could earn a living by exploring labyrinths. Harold had decided to get things ready as soon as possible. He reminded Adi to turn back if necessary because staying alive was the most important thing. Adi promised with a smile to stay alive and protect Harold. Harold was surprised to see Adi smile for the first time, but then he realized from what Adi said that he would also have to go into the labyrinth. They soon reached the abandoned cabin, which was nicer than they expected. Harold sometimes stopped by there when foraging. Adi offered to cook dinner. After they ate, Adi lay down on the floor and Harold covered her with a blanket. Adi suddenly seemed alert, but Harold reassured her it was okay to sleep. Soon enough, Adi fell asleep. Harold thought she might be pretending to sleep and waiting for him to do something. After all, she was now his slave, so who knows? The night ended with Harold staring at Adi's lips and scratching his head. The next morning, Harold heard marching sounds outside and found Imperial soldiers seemingly preparing for war. He didn't know what was happening on the continent, and Adi said she was scared. Harold suggested going to another continent. Adi asked if Harold was okay with it, and he assured her he could earn money for the trip and asked her where she wanted to go. Adi suggested the Great Astral Gorge in the southern continent. Harold agreed quickly but started worrying about the expenses. He remembered Adi suggesting earning money in the labyrinth, but Harold could only use a spear left behind by his grandpa. Suddenly, Adi found herself wondering why Harold wasn't asking about her specific suggestion. Harold grew curious and sat beside her. He gently touched her and hinted that he couldn't imagine life without her since he had become attached. He tried to kiss her, then pulled back, confessing that she had become important to him. Adi hesitated for a moment and then felt embarrassed. She nervously said that someone like her, who considered herself a servant, wasn't important. She quietly admitted that it was her first kiss. Later, Harold went to a store but hesitated outside, feeling awkward. He hoped the store owner wouldn't scold him and would let him work part-time. Just then, the store's door opened, and the owner stared at Harold. The owner teared up with relief, having feared the worst after seeing Harold's house burn down. Inside the store, Harold explained his situation to the owner but couldn't reveal why he wanted to travel to the southern continent. The owner understood that Harold had his reasons and lent him some money. He insisted that as a mentor, he should help his protégés, and the money was meant for Harold from the start. He urged Harold to accept it, likening it to a retirement payment after 15 years of service. Harold couldn't help but thank the store owner. Returning home, Harold found Adi had prepared a meal. He told her about the money and gave her a hat. Harold suggested she wear it to cover her ears and asked if she wanted a different one. Adi exclaimed she loved it and promised to cherish it. The next day, they went shopping for equipment. Adi quickly chose a sniper rifle without hesitation. The store owner had said the sniper rifle cost 50,000 rubes. Harold wanted to buy a pricier one, but Adi insisted on the cheaper rifle because a magic bow was too expensive, costing 6.8 million rubes. Adi explained that even though guns were cheaper, they still had firepower and could penetrate targets. Using bullets cost money, but it was worth it if you didn't waste shots. Adi also mentioned the downside of guns. They made a lot of noise. Harold was surprised to hear Adi talk so much. Harold suggested buying noise suppressors for the gun, which made Adi happy. She thanked Harold for the purchase. Soon after, Adi was fully equipped with the gear Harold bought her. She noticed Harold was wearing the same clothes and had only one spear. She told him that as her master, he should have better equipment. Harold said it was more important to equip the experienced fighter first, promising to get better gear when he could afford it. He admitted he was poorly equipped, but he didn't mind the cheap spear, even though he knew it could break easily. Harold thought he wouldn't last long enough in a fight to even use it. Harold didn't know about the labyrinth, so Adi explained it to him. She said it's a place where monsters live. and people go there to hunt them down and keep the area safe. Harold got it and wished his dad had taught him about it. But his dad always called him untalented, so Harold decided not to get involved in labyrinth exploring. Harold's dad was a skilled labyrinth hunter known by many. 15 years ago, he ventured into a labyrinth and never returned, presumed dead. He used to go deep into the labyrinth. Harold wondered why his dad took such risks, leaving the safe areas, especially since he used a spear that wasn't suited for tight spaces. Harold's mom had died when he was young, so he was alone now. That's why he warned Adie to stay away from danger. He didn't want to lose anyone else. Adie noticed something was bothering Harold, and he started complimenting her knowledge. She got flustered and asked him not to praise her too much. Harold found her embarrassed reaction cute. The two quickly entered the entrance of the labyrinth, but they hit a roadblock. Harold wondered if there had been an entrance fee. The guard assured them there wasn't, but they needed to be warned about a problem that had been reported. Some monsters from the lower floors were spotted on the upper levels. The guard said the knights were still investigating, but they hadn't found any monsters or witnesses inside. Harold turned to Adie for her opinion. Adie thought it couldn't be true that multiple monsters were there, suggesting it might be a false alarm. Still, she insisted they explore cautiously. Suddenly, someone declared they'd deal with the monsters. A group of explorers shoved aside the guards and spotted Harold and Adie. They asked if they were out of their minds. The leader mocked Harold for his shabby spear and said he couldn't possibly be copying the legendary labyrinth conqueror Edwin Smith, who had died 15 years ago. He said it was now the era of the sword sage, not someone from the past. Harold was taken aback when he heard his father's name being hailed as a legendary labyrinth conqueror and hero. He found it hard to believe. Then the leader of the explorers seemed to find Adie charming. He noticed her nice pair of melons and tried to approach her. This made Harold tense up, and suddenly he had his spear aimed at the explorer's neck from close range. He warned the explorer not to look at Adie that way. The explorer and his friends were shocked by what they saw and broke into a cold sweat. Harold wondered why everyone was so surprised. Another explorer urged him to calm down, pointing out that Adie was already prepared to defend herself. Harold was surprised to see Adie's expression and hoped she wasn't angry. He lowered his spear and signaled for Adie to move on. Everyone was left speechless, and one explorer questioned if they really witnessed what Harold did. However, nobody saw how quickly he reacted. Despite appearing inexperienced, the explorers decided it was best not to provoke Harold in the future. Inside the labyrinth, Harold felt impressed by the brightness of the place. Adie explained that it was because of something called the labyrinth luminance. She took the opportunity to thank Harold for something that happened earlier. With a shy and quiet voice, she expressed her happiness when he referred to her as his woman, revealing her desire to be with him. Though Harold couldn't quite hear her words, he was glad to see Adie's happiness. Shortly after, Adie took a stance and fired something into the dark tunnel. She confidently claimed she hit the target, surprising Harold since it was too dark for him to see. Adie explained that she always trusted her eyes and ears. Impressed by her skills, Harold wondered if they could explore deeper into the labyrinth. Adie mentioned she had ventured into the middle levels before, but never deeper because she was alone. This made Harold realize something, and he asked if Adie had any friends. At first, Adie fell silent, but then she mentioned having some friends on the western continent. Adie used to be part of an exploration team with other women, and she enjoyed it a lot. But then she became sad, and Harold, noticing her expression change, kindly suggested she didn't have to share if she didn't want to. Adie thought Harold was nice, so she decided to tell him what happened. Their leader fell in love with a man, and the group's earnings went to him. When Adie woke up after being drugged with sleeping pills, she found herself sold to a slave trader. She explained that dark elf virgins could fetch a high price. Harold felt sorry for Adie and condemned her former leader's actions. But Adie saw it differently. She felt fortunate to become a slave to someone like Harold instead of someone cruel. She said if she had ended up with a bad owner, she would have resented her leader even more. Harold was surprised because he didn't think he'd been a good leader. It had only been a day. To distract himself, he decided to hunt. As Adie shared more, she started to understand her leader's motives, realizing she'd do anything for Harold. Shortly after, Adie was sniping some monsters again, and Harold would handle the dismantling. As they continued exploring, Adie noticed a room that seemed to hold treasures. Since they were about to finish for the day, Harold suggested they check it out before heading home. Adie then used her magic, and suddenly butterflies appeared, surprising Harold. She explained that her butterflies could detect malice and would stop in front of traps. Harold was impressed by her abilities. Adie mentioned that the magic she knew wasn't suitable for direct battles. She checked her butterflies and noticed many traps ahead, assuming there were still treasures. However, Harold knew many explorers had already been on the upper levels. Adie guessed that new treasures might have appeared. Seeing Harold's confusion, she explained that labyrinths had their own wills. Once a treasure was taken from an area, new treasures and traps would reappear after a few days along with monsters. Harold found labyrinths mysterious. They decided to enter the room and found a dagger placed inside. Harold's eyes widened, and Adie suspected it might be cursed or rare in the upper levels. Harold asked 80 for advice since she was more experienced. If the dagger was cursed, they wouldn't be able to use or sell it, and only magic tools could help analyze it. She suggested leaving the dagger until they obtained the expensive tools, which cost as much as a whole house. Harold was shocked because it was worth 15 years of his hard work. 80 explained they could reach their target amount in a month or even in one go while exploring. However, Harold preferred to take it easy and earn safely. They shared a sweet glance at each other. Shortly after, the two emerged from the labyrinth and noticed a commotion nearby. It was the armored guy who had purchased the elf from the slave auction. He was rumored to be the third son of a count who frequently ventured into the labyrinth. Harold recognized them easily. The count's son began boasting about his elf slave, insisting she acknowledge him as her master. Harold couldn't believe it and suggested the elf should resist. However, she wore a slave collar that could instantly end her life. The count's son continued boasting about the elf's magical abilities and nocturnal activities, flaunting that he was the only one permitted to indulge in such pleasures. The onlookers started to fantasize, eagerly anticipating their turn. 80 tried to intervene, but Harold stopped him and they left. They then visited a trading company that Harold knew from his time working with the silversmith. A man named Tosu recognized him and inquired about his needs. Harold presented the pelt they had obtained from the labyrinth. Tosu was surprised to learn that Harold had become a labyrinth explorer. Harold explained that he needed money to travel to the southern continent, citing various reasons. Tosu refrained from probing further and offered 12,000 rubes for the pelts. Harold was astonished, considering his previous job paid only 7,000 rubes a day. He decided to wait and see if he could save money faster. Harold then asked Tosu about the expenses involved in traveling to the southern continent. Later, in the cabin, Harold found out from Tosu a while ago that he needed 3 million rubes for him and 80 to go west, and 10 million rubes to go directly south. It would have been cheaper and safer to go west, even though it would take some time. Harold estimated the initial cost to be around 5 million. Harold and 80 spent their days exploring the labyrinth and collecting treasures. After a week, they had earned 170,000 rubes. Harold suggested going to the middle levels, but 80 assured him that she had everything under control. Harold trusted 80's words, unaware of what they would soon face. As Harold and 80 made their way to the middle levels, Harold started feeling anxious about what they might encounter. He noticed that 80 seemed uneasy too. She said she sensed something approaching and urged Harold to hide. Suddenly, they heard loud stomping, and a massive lizard-like monster emerged, roaring loudly. It charged off in a particular direction, leaving Harold and 80 shocked. 80 identified it as an earth dragon from the lower floors, which Harold remembered hearing about from the guards' reports. 80 apologized, realizing her bullets wouldn't even scratch such a monster. Harold suggested they should head home, but 80 suddenly heard something. An explorer appeared, frantically running away from something. He pleaded for help, explaining that a high-level monster had appeared. He said his teammates were hiding in a crevice, and the monster was waiting for them to come out. Harold recognized the man as the one who had offended him and 80 previously. He knew it was too late to call for outside help, and doubted many people could defeat the huge lizard. Harold didn't want to get involved in someone else's mess. He tried to refuse, but the man started crying about his teammates' families and children grieving over their deaths. Hearing this, Harold remembered his own childhood trauma of being abandoned. He asked the man where his teammates were, despite 80's worry. Thinking about the children waiting for their loved ones, Harold felt compelled to help, despite finding the situation annoying. He mentioned using his secret weapon and left, asking Adi to take care of him if he collapsed. Adi tried to stop him, but Harold continued running until he found the huge lizard from earlier. He saw that it was focused on waiting for the explorers. Sneaking up behind it, Harold planned to lure it away easily since it was alone. He knew the arrogance and carelessness of the strong could be exploited as weaknesses. Harold took a step forward, swinging back his arm holding the spear. He tightened all of his muscles and gathered his energy, even though he felt his flesh getting torn apart. He forced all of his energy into the spear, which started heating up. His father had once explained that this power shouldn't exist in their world. Harold threw the spear blazing like the sun god's arrow. It was called the Blazing Continent Piercing Spear. The huge lizard was startled as it got hit, falling to the ground as part of its body disintegrated. The recoil of the technique then came, and Harold fell forward with a loud thud. Shortly after, Harold woke up with his head on 80's lap. She cried as she wondered what had happened. Harold claimed he was okay and stood back up. He was only a little dizzy with no major side effects. 80 expressed her worries, seeing her master collapse and puke blood. She asked Harold to be more careful next time, and our protagonist didn't have a choice but to promise to do so. Harold then wondered what had happened to the others. Everyone came out and the man from before apologized for his rudeness from the other day. One explorer expressed his thanks to Harold, saying he would still be able to see his child again. Harold and 80 were glad that things went well. The group of explorers then left, and Harold was now worried about how to dismantle the huge lizard. 80 recalled how the skins of earth dragons were dragon metal. Harold claimed dismantling should be hard, but there was already a hole in the monster to make things easier. She then wondered how Harold had made a hole in such a sturdy earth dragon. Harold had told Adi about his skill, and the servant was shocked to learn that Harold possessed such a talent. However, Harold explained that he couldn't use it often because of the negative effects it caused. Adi remembered seeing her master unconscious and pleaded with Harold not to use it again. Harold was surprised by Adi's concern and promised not to use it recklessly. Suddenly, the group of explorers returned and offered to help carry the monster's carcass, since they owed Harold their lives. Harold was grateful and wondered how much the deep-layered monster was worth. Later, at the trading company, Harold was shocked to discover that the monster materials he brought back were valued at 13 million rubes. Harold suddenly felt dizzy, realizing why labyrinths attracted so many people. Because the sum was substantial, the receptionist asked for Harold's bank account details. Harold realized it was worth the risk of using the dangerous technique. 2 days later, Harold was in awe as he saw 13 million rubes transferred to his account. He still couldn't believe it, but at least now they could board the ship. Harold returned home with a peach tart, bringing a wide smile to Adi's face. He claimed it was for Adi, who had waited patiently at home. As Adi enjoyed the peach tart, Harold explained that they would be leaving for the port city the next day. The following day, they rode in a carriage headed for the port city. From there, they planned to catch a ship to the southern continent via the western one. As the carriage departed, Harold glanced out the window, bidding farewell to his burned-down home. Traveling wasn't something he'd anticipated, but Adi had changed his circumstances. Catching Harold's gaze, Adi noticed and he casually inquired about the western continent. Adi described it as not a bad place despite racial tensions, highlighting its diversity's charm. Harold trusted Adi to share more details later, expressing apology. Adi, flustered, admitted happiness at Harold's reliance on her. Shortly afterward, an old man and his granddaughter awaited their ride. They boarded a passing carriage, and the old man spotted Harold and Adi. He thought he recognized Harold but dismissed it as a mistake, assuming the person he knew had passed away long ago. Though he couldn't recall the name, he remembered how that person bested his son in combat, wielding a spear. His granddaughter scolded him for being impolite, prompting an apology as he struggled to match names with faces lately. Introducing themselves as Varen and Cecil, the girl asked about the old man's son's name, Gergo. The old man eventually remembered the name, and Harold swore he'd heard it before. Cecil apologized to Harold, and then Varen did the same. Varen sat down, worrying about Cecil's anger issues during their journey to the western continent. Harold and Adi were surprised to learn they were heading to the same place. Both groups hoped they could have a pleasant journey together. Shortly after, the carriage reached the port city. As Varen bid his farewells, Cecil mentioned they were boarding a ship called Balestia, and suggested considering the same option. The grandfather-grandchild pair departed, leaving Adi pondering their next move. Harold was okay with it as long as it wasn't too expensive. As they looked around, they learned that many ships had recently docked. Harold inquired about Balestia. The attendant mentioned it would cost 2.8 million rubes for 2 people, including a room and 2 meals a day for the month-long voyage. He also suggested a cheaper option at 200,000 rubes per person, where they would share a large, unclean room with others and have only 1 meal a day, with the added risk of the ship sinking. He advised them to take their time deciding since they had a week before the ships departed. Harold and Adi had decided to search for an inn as their first step, but they were unexpectedly interrupted when someone bumped into them. A child swiftly grabbed Harold's bag and dashed away. Harold felt devastated because the bag held over 10 million rubes. He urgently called out to the child to stop, and the child stopped in his tracks just as something nearly struck their legs. With a thud, the child fell to the ground, and Harold scooped them up like a stray cat. Noticing a bullet dent nearby, Harold realized Adi brought out her sniper rifle. She apologized to Harold, but then swiftly turned her attention to scolding the child for his misdeeds. Harold also noticed the child's unkempt appearance and unpleasant odor. He offered the child money, but Adi attempted to educate them instead. However, the child lashed out in response, leaving Adi frustrated. Suddenly, a woman appeared and revealed herself to be the child's mother. She apologized for the trouble, but Harold reassured her as the money was returned and suggested guiding the child properly. The mother claimed she was doing her best, but the child suddenly shouted about needing money to help their father pay off debts and dashed away. The mother chased her son, and Harold thought she seemed preoccupied. Adi said it was a common situation. They tried to find a place to stay, but kept getting rejected for various reasons. They almost gave up and considered camping outside, but eventually found a place with an extra room. It had a small room with a double bed inside. Harold was surprised by the size of the bed, while Adi was excited about the 2 pillows on the bed. Harold wondered if he should sleep on the floor. He thought about taking a bath to figure things out, but Adi thought he meant he was dirty, which he wasn't. She also wanted to bathe because the room smelled. Harold wondered if Adi was worried about her own smell, so he sniffed himself, making Adi flustered. Harold reassured her that it didn't bother him. Adi hurried off to take a bath, leaving Harold confused. Another clueless protagonist, folks. Harold had also taken a bath and overheard some men talking about a place called Tawakul. One man claimed it was a beautiful spot and they would be there in a month or two. They also heard a rumor about the Empire making moves with the possibility of roads being blocked. Harold realized he wasn't the only one finding the situation strange, but it didn't bother him much anymore. He was traveling and simply surrendered his tired mind and body to the bed. He realized he couldn't sleep on the hard floor and decided to sleep next to 80 since there would be no harm in it. Just then, 80 returned to the room with a flirtatious tone, wondering if Harold was already asleep. Harold pretended to be asleep because he didn't want to seem like a bad guy to Adi. However, he suddenly grabbed 80's arms by surprise and pulled her closer to him. 80 was surprised that Harold was still awake and began to surrender herself to him by giving him a hug. Harold was confused that 80 wasn't resisting and wondered if it was because of the slave collar. He was worried about what 80 thought of him but decided it was better not to dwell on it. 80 mentioned she had been waiting for this moment to arrive. Harold then shifted the conversation to the topic of ships. 80 confessed she was inexperienced and asked Harold to be gentle. Harold agreed and asked 80 which ship she wanted aboard, leaving her stunned. Bro, she wanted to ride something else, not the ship, for God's sake. Harold began discussing how the tickets would sell out soon and suggested riding Balestia. Seeing 80 pouting reminded me of Fern. 80 remembered Cecil and Varen. Harold claimed it was just the right price with his budget in mind. Still pouting, 80 simply agreed with her dense master. She looked away as Harold told her they would buy the tickets in the morning, which made Harold wonder why his dark elf was in a bad mood. Seeing 80 lie down, Harold decided to lie down too while hugging 80, thinking that this was what a master should do. However, this only frustrated 80 more, hoping that Harold might go further since she was ready for him, but Harold just slowly went to sleep as he found his body pillow soft. The next morning, Harold and Adi went to buy the tickets to ride Balestia. They were given the tickets and were reminded that the ship would leave at noon in exactly 5 days. Harold suggested getting their room ready since they could start staying in it right away. The two soon went to the Balestia and showed their tickets. The sailor was surprised that they got a great room. They went to their room and 80 was surprised to see that they could see the underwater scenery. It was a beautiful sight and Harold wondered if this was what the sailor was talking about. Seeing how preoccupied 80 was, Harold decided to leave her alone. He went outside the room to check out the ship and discovered Cecil along the way. He told her that there weren't any other good ships. Then he asked where Varen had gone. Cecil said her grandpa was sleeping and suggested they go walk around the city together since they were on the same ship. Harold wondered why being on the same ship mattered for walking around the city, but Cecil insisted, so he followed her. Cecil then dragged him somewhere and bought some crepes. She even insisted Harold to eat some, but he didn't want to. After Cecil finished her food, she exclaimed how her grandpa took a liking to Harold. Harold confirmed they had some small talk. Cecil mentioned her grandpa wasn't friendly to others, but he seemed different when talking to Harold. Suddenly, she drew out her sword and slashed it toward Harold. However, Harold easily parried it with his cheap-looking spear and casually remarked that it was dangerous. Cecil smirked and claimed she would have stopped if Harold couldn't react. She couldn't believe Harold parried instead of dodging, showing he saw her attack. Harold found Cecil reckless but amazing and wondered why she attacked. Cecil said Harold must have been skilled since her grandpa took an interest in him. She said she tested him and wouldn't do it again. Still, Harold doubted her. Cecil suggested going back to the ship together, but Harold didn't want to trust her anymore. As Cecil apologized, they suddenly heard a kid's voice asking for help. They witnessed a kidnapping right in front of them. Harold recognized the kid from the other day. Cecil chased after them to save the kid. Harold couldn't believe Cecil didn't hesitate. Cecil was surprised to see Harold run after her. He said he was following just in case something happened. Cecil called him a nice guy with the strength to back it up. They soon reached the docks and found the kidnappers on a small boat. They were late and Cecil got a boat and told him to get on. Harold worried since Cecil was basically stealing, but she promised to pay back the owners even if the boat broke. After some rowing, they found the kidnappers' hideout. Harold thought there might be many people there because of all the boats. But Cecil wasn't bothered. She just wanted to bring them to justice. Harold suggested they secure the area first, but Cecil didn't think it was necessary because they were both strong. Harold wondered why Cecil was so confident. Then he saw a boat in the distance, but it disappeared quickly. He thought it was just a fishing boat and didn't pay much attention. They went further into the island and Cecil started searching around. Harold stopped her from being reckless and grabbed her gently. He pointed out some fresh footprints on the trampled grass, thinking someone had recently passed through. Cecil said she already knew. Harold apologized sarcastically, which made Cecil pout. Eventually, they reached a house where the footprints ended. All of a sudden, the rain started pouring heavily, surprising Harold and Cecil. Cecil hurried towards a nearby building for shelter, but Harold stopped her, worried it might alert whoever was inside. Cecil suggested she could take down anyone in her way, but Harold disagreed. They eventually found an open window and took shelter inside some barrels. Cecil found Harold's caution annoying, as she preferred taking out threats immediately. Harold insisted on being cautious, making Cecil compare him to her grandpa. Just then, they heard footsteps and saw the kidnappers approaching. It turned out they had kidnapped a child who had stolen their goods. The bearded man planned to hand the child over to their boss, which made his partner uneasy. They agreed, mentioning their boss's fondness for boys, though many had escaped before. Harold realized how despicable these people were. Suddenly, they spotted a spear sticking out of a barrel. Harold grew nervous as the bearded man attempted to pull it out, but his partner warned against touching things without permission. They all left, leaving Harold to acknowledge how odd it was for a spear to suddenly appear. Cecil couldn't believe his reaction. Harold and Cecil had been sneaking around the kidnappers' base when they encountered a pair of patrolling kidnappers. They quickly hid in a nearby room. Inside, Cecil discovered an egg on an altar and lightly touched it, causing it to move vigorously and crack open. Something emerged from the egg, frightening Cecil as it wriggled into her clothes. She couldn't help but make a noise, alerting the kidnappers. Harold covered her mouth as they hid, but the hatchling continued moving inside her clothes. The kidnappers, hearing the sound, searched the room but found no one and no signs of theft. Harold struggled to keep Cecil quiet as they found another hiding spot. Meanwhile, the hatchling continued moving inside Cecil's clothes. One of the kidnappers noticed the broken egg and speculated if the noise had come from the hatchling. They worried about its safety since it had hatched strongly, evidenced by the scattered eggshells. Their concern grew as they feared their boss's reaction if they couldn't find it. Cecil continued to moan, asking Harold to remove the hatchling from her clothes. Since he didn't have a choice, Harold reached inside her clothes, which surprised Cecil. Cecil had started complaining about what Harold was grabbing. Harold apologized, saying he didn't have a choice. However, the hatchling wriggled its way to Cecil's pants to escape Harold's hands. Cecil kept moaning as Harold searched for the hatchling in her pants. When Cecil reached her climax, Harold finally grabbed the hatchling and Cecil's knees went weak. She leaned on Harold and apologized for causing a fuss. Harold told her not to worry. Since the kidnappers couldn't find anything, they decided to give up, knowing they'd find it when it was time to sell their goods. Harold and Cecil emerged from the cabinet looking relieved. Cecil wondered how long Harold would hug her. Harold quickly backed off, apologizing, but Cecil was okay with it. Harold kept apologizing, but Cecil whispered that she wasn't that upset. Harold didn't understand why Cecil was acting indifferent until he realized he had the hatchling. It was a little onyx-like creature. Harold told it would be sold, and the hatchling became sad. Harold realized it wasn't an ordinary snake and asked if it understood him. The onyx nodded, and Harold called it smart. It was happy Harold wanted to take it with him. However, Cecil found it uncomfortable after what she had just gone through. Harold said he was interested in the little onyx. Harold and Cecil had been sneaking around until they reached the door on the top floor. Suddenly, they heard a woman's voice enjoying something and the cries of a little boy. Harold recognized the kid's voice from earlier. Since sneaking out while rescuing him was impossible, Cecil asked Harold what to do next. Harold suggested breaking in by force and told Cecil to rush and grab the child as soon as they entered. He knew that the boss's lackeys would flood in and they wouldn't be able to focus on fighting with the kid. Cecil found the plan absurd since they could just attack together and she was stronger than the others. Harold claimed that was why he was leaving it to her. He begged Cecil and she gave up in the end and agreed to the plan. The two entered the room and found a strange creature, a half-woman, half-spider, enjoying herself on top of the kid. The spider-woman expressed her pleasure as she preyed on the little one. Harold was shocked, especially after remembering what the kidnappers had said. He hadn't expected their boss to be a half-demon. Harold signaled Cecil, and they devised their plan. The spider-woman noticed them and stood up, curious about their presence. Harold stated their intention to take the kid away, but the spider-woman had other ideas. She planned to encase the kid in a cocoon. She argued that the kid would be payment for stealing some of her goods. Revealing a medicine capable of curing any illness, she claimed it was worth no less than 50 million rubes. Harold remembered how the kid wanted to save his father from something. He couldn't believe such people were operating like pirates and even had a monster as their boss. Suddenly, the Spider-Woman became angry because her fun was ruined. Cecil immediately went on the offensive. However, the Spider-Woman's body was tough, and it only made the monster angrier. Harold then attacked from the side, but it was difficult for him to pierce her. He decided to tackle her and pushed her towards the wall. The half-monster boss was shocked by Harold's strength. Harold noticed the boss feeling the attack and told Cecil to grab the kid and run. Along the way, she also grabbed the medicine bottle. This made the Spider-Woman freak out and act hysterical because her child was taken along with her precious medicine. She called her lackeys and told half of them to fight Harold while the other half chased Cecil and the kid. Seeing the number of men left for Cecil, Harold smirked, knowing she could handle them. However, Harold found himself facing the monster boss and most of her men alone in the room. Seeing their numbers, Harold realized he was up against the main force. The bearded man led the lackeys, but Harold easily dodged his attack and kicked him away. Harold kept fighting back, injuring the pirates. The Spider-Woman couldn't help but curse at Harold for being tough. Harold panted, wondering if it had been an hour since he started fighting. The pirates kept cursing at him, and Harold asked them not to say such things. The Spider-Woman got frustrated and told her lackeys to move out of the way. Then she fired something gooey at Harold, but he dodged it, hitting a lackey instead. While in the air, the Spider-Woman reached for Harold, but he used the ceiling to change direction. The roof broke, and Harold knelt on the ground as rain started pouring in. The Spider-Woman could see that Harold was slowing down. Harold claimed he was only preserving his stamina. He was confident in beating the boss with his technique, but he would lose his weapon and be on his own. Suddenly, a lackey started screaming in pain, and Harold noticed how the lackey's face was melting. He realized it was acid from the Spider-Woman before. The boss then started firing more acid, and Harold could only dodge. In the meantime, a familiar figure had just arrived at a nearby cliff. Harold kept dodging the Spider-Woman's acid until he realized it was time to end things. He had already bought enough time, and his body had reached its limits. Harold tried to run away, but he suddenly slipped on the Spider-Woman's discharge on the floor while she was playing with the kid. Harold fell to the ground, and the Spider-Woman took this opportunity to try to finish him off. However, Adie had already spotted them and gathered mana on her gun and herself. She then fired a shot, hitting the Spider-Woman. Intense electricity coursed through the Spider-Woman's body as she almost killed Harold. She was completely fried, and smoke started coming out of her body. Her legs then broke apart, and the monster boss fell to the floor with a loud thud. Her followers were shocked and claimed it was bad luck that she was hit by lightning just when she seemed to be winning. Everyone was terrified and started running away. Harold was left alone and looked out the window, where he spotted Adie on the nearby cliff. The two of them had reunited, and Adie gave him a big hug. She had thought she wouldn't make it in time to help, so she put lightning power into her bullet. Harold was surprised to learn it was from Adie, seeing how strong the lightning was. He was even more surprised that Adie knew where he was, and Adie confessed she had a mark on him, which helped her track her master's whereabouts. Harold found the magic useful, but Adie explained it would only last for a week. Harold then hugged Adie and thanked her for worrying about him. Adie reminded him to always take her with him, and Harold promised to do so. Shortly after, Cecil spotted the two approaching and teased Harold for being slow. She was surprised to see Adie and asked how she got to the island. Harold asked her to hold off on the questions for later. Cecil agreed since they didn't have time to waste. However, if they sailed their boat, they wouldn't know which direction to go because of the heavy rain. Harold also realized they couldn't risk sinking. But surprisingly, the sky started to clear up, and Harold told them to set sail. While they were rowing their boats, Cecil noticed something unusual about the kid, and Harold wondered what it could be. She mentioned that the kid's body was getting colder, and upon closer inspection, they noticed small spots appearing all over his body. Harold remembered it might be the Spider-Woman's poison. Cecil attempted to wake up the kid, but then remembered she had medicine that could heal various illnesses. Harold worried it wouldn't work since poison technically isn't an illness. He thought it would be better if Cecil saved the medicine for herself. Shaking, Cecil tried to make the kid drink the medicine, but he only took a small amount. Soon after, he began coughing up blood, leaving Cecil devastated and questioning why the medicine wasn't working. The kid looked at her one last time before closing his eyes. Harold and Cecil were both left speechless. Harold then stated that they were too late. After they returned the boat they had hitched, they gave the kid a proper burial. Harold remembered how the kid's mother used to give her son a kind hug. He couldn't bring himself to show the kid's lifeless body to her or tell her about it. They decided to say the kid had just gone missing. Cecil offered some flowers, saying she didn't regret saving the kid on her own. Harold and Adie gave Cecil some time because she seemed to have already calmed her heart. Harold wondered if it was connected to someone's natural talent for fighting. Weapons are closely tied to life. To use weapons, a person must understand the delicate balance between them. He guessed Adie might feel the same as Cecil since she was familiar with labyrinths. Harold realized he was the only one living normally and hadn't gotten used to things like death. Harold had a disappointed look on his face, feeling down as he made his way back to the ship. Adie tried to comfort him, saying there was nothing he could have done differently. Suddenly they were approached by a woman, the kid's mother. Harold felt a pang of guilt as she asked if they had seen her missing child. She explained that the kid's father had recently passed away, and he had wanted to see his son one last time. It dawned on Harold that the child had been searching for medicine for his father all along. Despite his efforts to save his father, he and his dad lost their lives because they couldn't get the medicine in time. Harold wondered if there was something more he could have done to save them both. Adie looked at Harold with concern as he became lost in his thoughts, unable to figure out what he should have done differently. The mother eventually stopped crying and apologized to Harold and Adie. She said she would go look for her son, as he was all she had left. Harold watched her leave, feeling guilty. Adie noticed his troubled expression and wanted to help him feel better. A few days later, nothing unusual occurred except for the moment when Harold presented Adie with the rock snake, and they chose a name for it together. Nonetheless, it marked their final night in the port city. As time went by, the disappearance of the child became a thing of the past. It was sad, but Harold chose not to dwell on it too heavily since sudden endings were bound to happen. However, Harold felt uneasy about his own potential demise. He could have perished when he slept in his burning house. He could have met his end in the pirate's hideout if Adie hadn't arrived in time. Adie entered the room and noticed Harold's serious face. She asked him what was bothering him, but Harold brushed it off as nothing, as he often did. Adie insisted she could see he was in pain. Despite Harold's denials, Adie surprised him with a passionate kiss. Harold was taken aback and remained still until Adie pulled away. Adie started breathing heavily and explained to Harold that when a man is going through something tough, sometimes kissing a woman without overthinking is the best remedy. She undressed herself and invited Harold to do whatever he wanted. Harold hesitated, expressing concern and asking if Adie was sure. Then he gently pushed Adie onto the bed, reminding her that once they started, he wouldn't stop even if she wanted him to. Shortly after, Harold appeared guilty following an action he had taken against Adie. He then recalled that Adie had given him approval, and he wasn't acting aggressively. He questioned whether Adie's words were merely to soothe his nerves, and if she wasn't truly serious about wanting her fields tended. Nevertheless, he understood that Adie wouldn't have any harmful intentions towards him because of the slave collar. He acknowledged that he desired Adie for more than just her body. Harold decided to calm down after finishing his meal and headed to the ship's dining area. Despite wandering around the ship to clear his mind, he couldn't shake off his frustration. Suddenly, he recognized a familiar voice. It was Varen, Cecil's grandfather. Varen quietly joined Harold and expressed his gratitude for looking after Cecil recently. He also apologized for any trouble she may have caused. Harold remembered rescuing Cecil and was surprised she had told Varen about it. He tried to downplay his role, saying Cecil was capable on her own, but Varen insisted on thanking him. Harold mentioned Cecil's strength, but Varen pointed out that strength, winning, and survival were different matters. This made Harold think about his own father and his childhood. Varen then warned about Cecil's recklessness and the potential danger it could bring. He had heard about Harold's behavior from Cecil and wondered if Harold had been caught off guard by her. Seeing Harold's reaction, Varen felt compelled to apologize. Harold assured him it was fine, and Varen was relieved. The old man then encouraged Harold to open up about any troubles he might have. Harold mentioned he was just trying to calm down. Shortly after, he witnessed Harold and Varen confronting each other while a crowd gathered around them. People believed it was a spectacle between a swordsman and a spearman. Harold didn't understand how things escalated into a duel. Varen chuckled and suggested that the best way to clear his mind was through combat. Harold could see the similarity between Varen and Cecil. They both relied heavily on brute strength. Varen casually invited Harold to attack him with full force. This made Harold uneasy, but he tensed up when he sensed Varen's intimidating presence. Instinctively, Harold assumed a defensive stance upon realizing that Varen was no ordinary old man. Varen then remembered that he hadn't mentioned his title to Harold. He introduced himself as Varen Myers, mentioning he used to be a sword sage. Harold felt shocked. Even though he wasn't very skilled in martial arts, he understood what the title meant. It dawned on him that Cecil had learned from someone who was once a sword sage. Before Harold could think more about it, Varen interrupted his thoughts by stomping and advising Harold to see him as someone he could rely on. Harold admitted he was afraid of being countered by Varen. Varen acknowledged this was possible but assured Harold he wouldn't let him escape. Harold, feeling the vast difference in their abilities, considered giving up and dropping his spear. Since Harold wasn't making any moves, Varen decided to attack instead, swiftly disappearing from sight. Everyone was surprised except Harold, who anticipated where the attack was coming from and managed to block it, even counterattacking instantly. Varen, just as surprised as the others, didn't expect Harold to react so swiftly. He assumed Harold's eyes couldn't keep up, and Harold agreed, admitting he hadn't actually seen Varen. They both backed off, and Varen acknowledged Harold's good instincts. Harold noticed Varen's relaxed demeanor and realized Varen was holding back. Suddenly, Varen resumed his offensive, unleashing a flurry of attacks on Harold. Harold wondered how long he could keep defending himself. Shortly after, the crowd watched in amazement as the fight unfolded. Harold ended up beaten on the ground, astonished that he lasted only a few minutes. Varen then wondered if Harold had calmed down. He helped him to his feet, and Harold realized he had indeed cooled off. Recognizing it was the right thing to do, Harold decided to apologize to Adie. He expressed his gratitude to Varen, who was pleased. They sat down for another conversation. Varen shared his own struggles from his days as a sword sage, noting that some people claim to rid themselves of worries by avoiding responsibility. Harold questioned why someone as strong as Varen still worried and hesitated. Varen admitted that even in his old age, he still wrestled with troubles, especially when he had fled in the past. Harold asked for clarification, and Varen explained that war was imminent in the northeast continent, and the Empire was set on unifying the land. Knowing this, Varen had fled the Empire to protect his granddaughter from the conflict, choosing to travel across the continent instead. As the former sword sage, he used to gather information about different things. He learned that the Empire was in a state of confusion. They claimed they were strengthening their army for the war, but they were actually secretly experimenting with combining humans and demons from the labyrinth. Harold remembered the half-spider, half-human creature they had defeated. Varen found out about it from Cecil, and guessed the spider woman might have been from the Empire, escaping and turning to banditry. He thought humanoid monsters might also emerge from the labyrinths on their own, but it was rare. Varen worried because such creatures were strong. However, Harold knew that to Varen, the monster would seem weak. He could defeat it quickly. It was fortunate that Harold and Adie had left the continent early after Varen confirmed the war. Varen had been explaining how he had left everything behind to protect Cecil. It haunted him, making him wonder if he had made the right choice. Harold was surprised that someone like Varen, who didn't seem burdened by sadness, still had such worries. He realized he had been struggling with self-loathing and trying to keep his composure. Later, Harold paced back and forth in front of his room. He took a ring out of his pocket. Earlier, he had visited the ship's onboard shop and spotted a silver clay from the labyrinth, valued at 200,000 rubes. He hoped to apologize to Adie with a handmade gift to show his sincerity. Harold then asked if there were any tools available, and the shop owner lent them for free. The shop owner wondered if Harold would do it himself, and Harold confirmed that he had worked as a silversmith for 15 years. After pondering for a while, Harold opened the door and found Adie feeding the rock snake. Adie smiled when she saw her master return. Harold awkwardly inquired about what Adie had been doing. The dark elf said she was feeding Echidna. Harold fell silent until he admitted that he needed to apologize for what had happened the day before. Adie was puzzled and asked what he meant. Harold apologized for misinterpreting her words and forcing himself on her. Then he placed a silver ring on Adie's finger. Adie was shocked that Harold had bought such an expensive-looking ring for her. Harold revealed that he had made it himself, surprising Adie. He explained that silver was effective against demons and werewolves. Adie mentioned that a werewolf had attacked her the previous night. She giggled and jokingly wondered if wearing the ring meant no other werewolves would attack her besides Harold. She clarified that Harold had misunderstood her and admitted she was happy. She shyly confessed that it had been a memorable first time for her to be loved with care. Harold blushed but soon wore an expression indicating he didn't believe her. Adie noticed his expression and hugged him, gently guiding him down onto the bed. She then decided to show her affection once more. Adie leaned in for a deep kiss, surprising Harold. He wrapped his arms around her tightly, and Adie asked him to wait for a moment. She then immersed herself once again in kissing Harold and invited him for another intimate moment. As another night fell, it was Adie's turn to take charge, guiding their actions. She felt concerned about her weight, but Harold didn't mind at all. Adie worked hard to express her true feelings for Harold, feeling guilty for making him think about misunderstanding things. With a trembling voice, Adie began to apologize, but Harold continued plowing her fields as the night went on. Echidna observed them for a while before leaving like a pet cat. Shortly after, the Balestia reached an island to restock for 5 days. Everyone disembarked from the ship, especially Harold and Adie, eager to explore. They hoped there would be interesting sights to see. As they strolled around, Adie mentioned that ports usually had a similar feel and similar kinds of people, except for military ports. Harold then wondered if they would visit one of those later. Adie said Harold might find it surprising because there would be a serious atmosphere with soldiers patrolling the streets. Harold found it intimidating. Adie agreed it could be tense but somewhat safer despite certain problems. Harold asked what those problems were. Adie hesitated to tell him but eventually admitted that there were many brothels and colorful streets because most of the soldiers were men. This led to issues like broken faces and the spread of diseases being common. Adie was concerned for Harold's well-being since he might be tempted by such places. Harold reassured her not to worry because he only had eyes for her. His words made Adie blush deeply and she began to act happier. The two continued to stroll around, taking in the sights. They found a bench to rest on, and Adie let out a sigh of relief about something. She told Harold she really cared for him and was happy they had become physically close. Adie admitted she would have resisted if Harold had tried anything on the first day he bought her. Harold remembered how he had refrained from making any advances and let Adie sleep on the first day. This made him feel a little guilty because he had some impure thoughts back then. Harold then wondered how long Adie had felt this way about him. Adie smiled and confessed that it was when he kissed her unexpectedly, and she appreciated that he treated her kindly unlike others who disliked dark elves like her. She was attracted to Harold's passion for her as a woman. Harold smiled back and said there was no need for the slave collar. He wanted to remove it, but Adie didn't mind wearing it because it showed she belonged to him. The two kept walking around. Harold felt relieved to hear such words from Adie because he wanted to remove the slave collar. Then they stopped walking when they spotted a fancy cruise ship docked in the port. Adie mentioned seeing similar ships in one of the port towns. Harold realized that the passengers were also from their hometown. Suddenly, he glimpsed a familiar figure. Adie asked if something was wrong, but Harold brushed it off as just seeing something odd. The next day, Harold found some time to play fetch with Echidna. Seeing that Adie seemed eager to try, Harold handed her the stick, and it was her turn to play with the rock snake. Suddenly, a piece of paper slipped under the door, and Harold picked it up. It was a newspaper inviting people to visit the night market. Harold wondered if there was anything interesting to see, and he asked Adie if she wanted to go. Adie didn't hesitate to agree with Harold. That night, the two walked around and found many people. They sensed something unusual besides the advertisements for the night market. While exploring, they stumbled upon several gambling dens. Harold understood the island's strategic advantage as a stopover for such activities. Suddenly, they overheard gamblers praising a girl's gambling skills. It was Cecil, and her loud voice could be heard from outside. Harold worried that Varen might discover Cecil's gambling habit despite his stern demeanor. He debated whether to inform Varen as he owed the old man a lot. Ultimately, he chose to ignore Cecil's voice, and Adie agreed. As they strolled through the night market, they noticed a chained slave being dragged through the streets. Those melons looked oddly familiar. The next morning, Echidna slithered around Harold as if they were performing in a two-person circus. Ati applauded as Echidna halted on Harold's head. Harold noticed Echidna growing bigger and heavier without shedding its skin. He wondered if Echidna was truly a snake. Considering Echidna's origin from the half-demon's base, he pondered if they were alike. However, Harold dismissed these thoughts. Suddenly, they heard loud voices echoing down the hallway. Harold and Adie went to see what was happening and found an angry Varen holding his granddaughter. He couldn't believe that Cecil had been gambling, but the granddaughter argued that it was a sure win. Harold and Adie listened as Cecil proudly declared they hadn't lost anything and had won it all instead. Cecil boasted about how keen their eyes were at spotting the dice roll and cards being dealt. Varen then began spanking her, and insisted she should use her eyes for swordsmanship instead. Harold and Adie watched as Cecil endured the punishment until she noticed them watching and asked for their help. However, Harold refused to assist her, and Varen continued the spanking. Adie expressed sympathy, but Harold felt Cecil should have been prepared for the consequences. Suddenly, Adie's expression changed when she heard Cecil casually calling Harold by his name. Harold didn't catch what she said, but Adie dismissed it as nothing. Later, Harold noticed Adie pouting and playfully poked her cheeks, calling her cute. This caused Adie to become flustered and blush. Later, in the dining hall, people chatted about a fire that had happened that morning. They discussed how quickly it spread and how it easily destroyed the house. Harold overheard their conversation and felt sorry for the homeowner, having experienced a similar loss himself. Adie wondered if the fire was accidental or if someone left kindling unattended. They were supposed to leave the island the next day, but Harold couldn't shake off his concern. Harold and Adie stepped outside, discussing their plans to travel to the western continent. Suddenly, they encountered Cecil, who looked surprised. She called Harold cold-hearted and a traitor before quickly leaving, sticking out her tongue. As the sun began to set, Harold recognized the path Cecil was walking toward. Adie wondered what to do, but Harold chose not to intervene. Pouting, Adie questioned if Harold was being too kind to Cecil. Harold was taken aback by Adie's strange behavior. Adie then mentioned how cute she found Cecil, someone she saw as needing protection due to her perceived weakness. Confused, Harold asked Adie what was going on. Adie brushed it off, leaving Harold puzzled about her sudden bad mood. Shortly after, Adie was puzzled when Harold suggested they go to the deck. He said he wanted to enjoy the view with her by his side. Adie's mood brightened suddenly. Echidna came out from between her melons, resembling a pet dog eager for a walk. They decided to bring Echidna with them. On the deck, they watched the city lights at night. Though the view seemed ordinary to Harold, all he wanted was to see Adie smile and be happy. He was relieved to see her in a better mood. After a while, the two decided to head back to their room. Just then, they spotted Varen on the deck, gazing towards the city with a serious look. They caught his attention, and Harold wondered why he was outside. With a stern expression, he mentioned he was waiting for his troublesome grandchild. Harold could sense Varen's unhappiness and asked what he planned to do when Cecil Varen replied he had no choice but to discipline her, perhaps by restraining her until she reflected on her actions. Harold thought it sounded harsh, and Varen questioned if he was siding with Cecil. Harold denied it, and Varen warned him not to inquire further. While fretting over Cecil, Harold noticed Adie glaring at him once more. Varen lamented how Cecil never listened. Harold then shared that children often don't understand their parents' intentions, and vice versa, which Varen acknowledged. He admitted he had been lenient in parenting, but decided it was time to change that. He couldn't believe Cecil, who had been trained in swordsmanship, was now involved in gambling. Harold realized it wasn't about the gambling itself, but rather Cecil tarnishing her reputation as a skilled swordsman. Varen shifted the conversation, curious about the creature peeking out from Adie's belongings. Harold explained it was their pet Echidna, which surprised Varen, given it was a demon. Seeing Harold's shock, Varen realized he didn't know. Harold wasn't too bothered, finding Echidna intriguing, and asked how Varen knew. Varen mentioned his experience in labyrinths, and assumed Adie had informed Harold about Echidna's true nature. Harold was taken aback and felt embarrassed for his ignorance. Varen remembered hearing about people who used to tame demons. Adie explained that it was mostly in stories because demons didn't usually like humans. Harold got the idea and tried to change the subject by wishing Varen good luck with Cecil, and with a worried look hoped Cecil would come back soon. Harold offered to go find Cecil because he believed bad kids should be punished. He thought he'd feel better seeing someone embarrassed. They walked around the area where people gamble, but Adie couldn't hear Cecil's voice like she did the other night. Suddenly, Adie heard Cecil's voice coming from a gambling house nearby. Harold thanked Adie for finding Cecil and promised to do her a favor later. Adie asked to use the favor right away. Harold was surprised but agreed when Adie asked cutely. Blushing, Harold agreed, knowing where it was heading. They entered the gambling house, but Harold noticed something was wrong. He quickly opened the door and saw the inside was on fire. Everyone was running out in a panic. Someone blamed letting a dangerous person inside. They couldn't believe someone started a fire just because they lost to a little girl. Harold wondered where Cecil was. They followed the crowd and found Cecil with her sword out, scolding someone for starting the fire. A man in armor claimed it was his idea of fun and blamed Cecil for not losing. Cecil was frustrated by his words. The armored man and his woman ran away. Cecil tried to chase them, but Harold stopped her, saying they should deal with the fire first. Cecil asked why Harold wasn't chasing the arsonist. Then she suddenly fainted and fell into Harold's arms. Adie said Cecil must have fainted from the heat and suggested taking her back to the ship. Harold asked if Adie did something, but she denied it, stuttering. She reminded Harold about the spreading fire, urging him to hurry. Harold concluded he was just imagining things. Shortly after, Varen felt relieved when Cecil returned, but he was puzzled to find her sleeping. Harold quickly explained the situation, and Varen understood why the streets were noisy. He felt sorry for his grandchild being caught up in the chaos, knowing punishment awaited. Harold and Adie walked back to their room feeling remorseful for Cecil. Adie mentioned she needed a bath to wash off the dirt from the burning building. Harold agreed and joined her in the bath. Later, in their room, Harold sniffed Adie's fragrant neck after her bath. They shared a kiss and then moved to the bed, as the ex-silversmith was doing some farm work by plowing the fields. Exhausted, they fell asleep peacefully. When Harold woke up, it was still dark outside. He gently touched Adie's cheeks and noticed Echidna staring at the door. The rock snake noticed Harold was awake and approached him, tugging at his shirt as if trying to convey something. Grabbing his spear, Harold followed Echidna outside, wondering if it wanted to admire the night view again. However, Echidna had different plans and led Harold away from the luxury ship. Ignoring the ship, Harold noticed a flickering light nearby. Investigating further, he found a fire burning in a nearby shack. He was relieved that there were no buildings close enough to catch fire easily. However, he found it suspicious that a fire had been started and wondered if it was due to recent arson. Suddenly, someone appeared behind him, an armored man accompanied by his elf slave. Harold asked the man who he was, but the man called Harold rude and proudly announced himself as the third son of a count from the Empire. Harold remembered him as the one who had won the elf in a bidding war. The man boasted about his status, and Harold couldn't help but agree. Curious why such a high-ranking man was on the island, Harold asked. The Count's son explained that he couldn't stay in one place for long because he heard a voice since childhood, which he treated as a divine revelation. He was grateful that his father supported him financially, ensuring he lacked no luxuries. The Count's son admitted that his inner voice often urged him to burn things he didn't like, finding amusement in watching them burn. He knew society disapproved of his behavior but mentioned he had refrained from arson since his last incident in the Kingdom of Lamist. Realizing that the Count's son was responsible for the burned shack and gambling house, Harold cursed inwardly. He also wondered if the house the Count's son had burned down in Lamist was newly constructed. The Count's son confirmed it, finding pleasure in burning something perfect and new. Harold was infuriated, realizing the man before him was the one who had destroyed his home. The Count's son had asked why Harold had asked. Harold had revenge on his mind, but he sighed, realizing he hadn't thought much about it before. He decided not to care about the house anymore since it was gone. When he saw how wild the Count's son appeared, Harold chose not to get involved with him. He dismissed it as nothing and tried to leave. But suddenly, a sword was pointed at him, and the Count's son said he wouldn't let Harold go until he confessed something. He didn't want Harold spreading rumors. Harold promised not to tell anyone. But the Count's son thought dead men kept secrets better and planned to silence the witnesses from the gambling house the other night. He talked about harming Cecil and using her to breed servants. Harold knew Cecil could defend herself, but he couldn't just leave his current situation. He looked around for Echidna and was relieved to see it hiding for safety. Suddenly, the Count's son attacked with his sword while Harold was distracted, but Harold easily blocked his attack. The Count's son was surprised and asked how Harold managed to block him. Harold was shocked, realizing the Count's son was weak. The Count's son kept attacking, but Harold easily defended himself. Seeing the Count's son's amateurish attacks, Harold realized he wasn't the formidable opponent he'd imagined. However, he noticed the elf, who had Cecil on high alert from the previous night. Harold knocked the Count's son aside and was surprised to see the elf looking pleased that her master was defeated. He remembered how she had been mistreated before and realized she just wanted to see her master get what he deserved. The Count's son had just risen to his feet, declaring his seriousness. He swung his sword downward, aiming for Harold, but Harold swiftly knocked him out with a blow from his spear to the forehead. Harold worried about becoming a target of revenge and contemplated killing the Count's son. However, the elf intervened, explaining that her life was tied to her master's by a slave collar, and if he died, she would too. Understanding the situation, Harold spared the Count's son. Grateful, the elf thanked Harold for standing up to her master, something she couldn't do herself. She questioned how someone seemingly weak like him ended up in labyrinth diving. She blamed her master's reckless hobby of starting fires for putting them in danger. As she restrained the Count's son, she continued to curse him. Confused by Harold's actions, the elf found herself tied up as well. Frustrated, she vented her anger towards Harold, fearing they would be treated unfairly as foreigners. Despite this, Harold insisted he couldn't let the arsonist go free, and left a note on the Count's son's unconscious form. Ignoring the elf's insults, Harold departed. Echidna emerged from hiding and Harold decided to return to their room. In the morning, Cecil was hanging tied up and Varen scolded him for using her talent for gambling. He worried about her getting involved with a rowdy man. Cecil shyly admitted that she liked gentlemen. Varen then reminded her that if Harold hadn't carried her back, she could have been in trouble. He was disappointed that Cecil had forgotten about it and called her immature. Cecil retorted, calling him immature too for getting mad. Harold watched the scene for a while and then decided to go back to sleep. Later that day, Harold wondered how much longer their trip would be. A sailor explained that there were 2 more weeks after one more stopover at an island. Harold realized it had been 20 days since they left the northeastern continent and he had experienced a lot of things along the way. He hoped they could take it easy on the next island. Soon after, Harold was astonished to see cats walking on 2 legs roaming around the new island. Adi explained that they were intelligent beasts that could understand human speech. She claimed they were not like demi-humans and were actually very rare. Just then, a cat wondered if something was wrong, and hoped they would do some shopping in the stores. He offered some dried fish as a welcome gift and then left. Harold was fascinated to see them speak and go fishing like human beings. While Harold was zoning out, Adi caught his attention when a new cat showed up, offering to give them a tour of the island at a discounted price. The cat was a tour guide who knew some hidden spots and charged 3,000 rubes for the tour. Harold was unsure and just stared at the cat, who started to tear up. The cat pleaded to be hired as their guide, even offering belly rubs. It was quite a desperate move. Adi became intrigued, but when Harold noticed her interest, she brushed it off as nothing. Eventually, Harold decided to hire the cat and asked for a belly rub. The cat eagerly accepted the offer and Harold told Adi to go ahead. Adi happily played with the cat's belly, and Harold was pleased to see her enjoying herself. During the tour, the cat led them around the island and showed them some expensive shops. After the tour, Harold paid the cat for the service. As the cat thanked him, it suddenly froze upon noticing the snake on Harold's shoulder. It began to scream, realizing it was a demon. Harold became worried, but the cat teased him, promising not to tell anyone. Then, it hinted at wanting to share something with Harold. Just then, they heard someone calling for help. It was another cat drowning and his friends couldn't swim either. Seeing the situation, Harold decided to take action and jumped into the water. Later, we see the cat shivering and thanking Harold for saving him. The tour guide watched as the other cats thanked Harold, convinced that he wasn't a bad person after all. He mentioned having a secret place that he couldn't show other customers. He wanted Harold and Adi to talk to someone there whom he couldn't reveal to others. He was the only one who spoke to that person and hoped his friends could talk to someone else occasionally. Adi pondered what to do, and Harold agreed with the tour guide. The cat was pleased that they agreed. Later, the tour guide Harold and Adi strolled along a perilous cliffside. The guide warned them to watch their cautioning about a rumored demon dwelling in an underwater castle below. Despite the superstition, the guide dismissed such tales. They halted at an open beach where Harold, unable to spot anything, was told they might encounter mermaids. Both Harold and Adi were astonished, having never seen one before, although they'd heard of explorers finding them in lower levels of labyrinth. Harold was amazed to meet one outside of such confines, assuming they were creatures akin to demons who roamed freely. The guide clarified that these mermaids hailed from the southern sea, and advised caution in their interactions since they were gentle beings. Suddenly, a mermaid named Anna emerged from the water, startling everyone. She appeared expecting Shabani, introducing herself and regarding Harold and Ati as guests upon Shabani's assurance of their goodwill. Anna found Harold amiable but was perturbed by Ati's sudden use of magic. Ati explained she conjured a butterfly to detect any nearby threats, apologizing for any offense caused. Anna accepted the apology, trusting Shabani's judgment of their character. Harold reassured Anna that Adi meant no harm. Oblivious, Harold suggested they all engage in pleasant conversation. As they chatted, Harold and Adi noticed Anna warming up to them. Harold expressed a desire to explore the surroundings and they marveled at the scenery together. Adi apologized for her magic use, but Harold appreciated her gesture, knowing it was meant to protect him. Adi also speculated about Anna's magical senses, impressed by their usefulness. Suddenly, Adi felt insecure, wondering if she wasn't enough for Harold. He reassured her, clarifying his feelings. Just then, they heard Shobani scream. Harold asked about the commotion and Anna revealed she had discovered the underwater castle mentioned in the tales. Shobani wondered if it had been true, and Anna said she had gone inside and seen something. Shobani asked if it had been a demon, but Anna wasn't sure because it had given off bad vibes. Scared, Shobani said it had been a big deal and he should have told everyone. However, Anna stopped him because telling them would have let them know about her existence too. Shobani realized that would have brought trouble since the others would have thought of Anna as a demon. Harold got curious about the issue, but he realized they had been outsiders. Shobani wondered what they should do, and Anna said she would go down again to check to make sure. Shobani asked her to be careful, and Anna called him kind, which was the part she had loved about him. Meanwhile, Cecil asked Varent to stop babysitting her. Varent exclaimed he didn't want to see her pull another stunt and suddenly felt back pain. Cecil wondered how Varent had even hurt his back. Just then, they noticed Harold and Adie coming back. Varent and Adie stared at each other. Varent said he was a man of his word, and Adie was glad to hear that. Harold and Cecil didn't know what the two had been talking about. Cecil then invited them to sit down for a meal. While eating, Cecil expressed her amazement at seeing the talking cats since she had never seen one before. Varent said he had happened to see them thousands of times before when he had been traveling in his younger days. He then said that nothing had changed on the island since 30 years ago when he had visited. Harold then asked what the purpose of his visit had been before, and Varent explained that his wife had wanted to travel around. Unfortunately, she had already been long gone and the world trip had been her last request in life. She had died before Cecil was born. Harold felt apologetic, but Varent told him not to worry since he was grateful for their time together. Harold had changed the topic by bringing up the island's superstition about an underwater castle. Varent said he knew about one from his youth when he was researching them. Harold wondered how Varent could reach it underwater. Varent said he could split the sea with his sword, surprising Harold. He did it at night so as not to startle the cats, but he couldn't see anything in the darkness. Cecil wondered if he was lying. Varent then said he didn't get the chance to show his true intentions while training Cecil to be strong. He reminded her to get stronger to know the truth. Cecil promised to work hard. Varent then reminded everyone that they would soon reach the western continent. He said it would be the right time to say goodbye to Harold and Adie, and he thanked them for everything. He knew that Harold and Adie would go to the southern continent, while he and Cecil would head to the western parts of the western continent. Harold thanked him and looked forward to meeting them again in the future. Cecil felt it was a shame since she really liked Harold. Before she could finish her sentence, Varent covered her mouth and quickly checked on Adie, who was sipping on her tea. The next day, Harold and Adie were getting intimate early in the morning. Adie asked him to hold her tighter while Anna watched them from outside the window. The three of them stared at each other for a while, and Harold felt flustered seeing Anna. Anna signaled them to go up and Adie said she wanted to talk to them. Later at the beach, Harold and Adie asked what the issue was. Anna assumed that the two of them could fight, seeing that Adie could use magic. She apologized since there was no one else she could ask for help, being a magical creature. Harold then asked what help she needed. She reminded them how she went back to the underwater castle. She had seen the weird guy again, the one from before. Just when she thought he wasn't a threat, she heard him talking about wanting more bones. Harold got the idea that Anna wanted fighters to deal with the weird guy, but he suggested avoiding him instead. Anna gave him a sharp look and said that Shobani and the others would be in danger if they left the weird guy alone. She slammed her tail hard, causing Adie to draw her gun. Anna quickly apologized, but Harold felt like he should be the one apologizing. Anna then expressed how important Shobani was to her and how she wouldn't trade their time together for anything. Harold was surprised to see Anna crying. Adie asked him what they should do and Harold decided to help. Adie confirmed that she would come along as usual. Anna wiped away her tears and thanked them. Later, Anna led Harold and Adie underwater while they were inside a bubble created by Adie's magic. Harold was amazed by Adie's abilities and asked the mermaid how they could enter the castle. Anna told them to leave it to her, and they finally reached the underwater castle. Harold watched as Anna worked her magic on the castle, causing the water around it to vanish. He was impressed when they stepped onto the ground. It felt just like being on land. Adie mentioned she could also use water-repelling magic, but it wasn't nearly as advanced as Anna's. Anna explained that mermaids were highly skilled in water magic, and she was one of the best. She sat on a rock and her tail suddenly transformed into legs. Adie wondered if it was magic, but Anna explained it was a natural trait of her race. She then warned them to be cautious since the weird guy would definitely notice them after using magic outside. As Harold looked around, he realized the place could crumble at any moment. He concluded it had been underwater for ages. Anna then pointed to a spot and the trio scanned the halls and rooms. Suddenly, Adie sensed something through her butterfly pendant. It was down the hallway ahead. They reached a great hall and Adie suddenly warned Harold about something from above. Something nearly hit Harold, and he discovered it was a golem. He had heard golems were created either through magic or incantation. The golem then attacked, but Harold quickly dodged. Up close, Harold saw it was made of bones shaped like a human. He asked Anna if it was the demon she saw, but she said it was something else. Adi suggested someone had conjured it. Suddenly, the golem started creaking and an eye appeared on its chest. Harold and Adi realized the conjurer was inside the golem all along. The conjurer smirked, confident they wouldn't beat the golem. Harold thought of knocking it down, but Adi suggested attacking the one inside. She aimed her sniper rifle and fired 2 bullets at its chest. The conjurer was surprised and the golem stopped moving. It started crumbling, surprising Harold and Anna. A man then appeared, kneeling on the ground. Adi claimed she was lucky there were gaps between the bones. Harold wondered if it was over, but Adi pointed her gun at the kneeling man, admitting she was wrong to think so. The man giggled, impressed by the accuracy. He got back up, confusing Harold, who saw him get shot. The man teased them, saying he wouldn't reveal his secret. Adi called him a necromancer. It was unusual for someone to turn themselves into an undead, but the man had done it. Adi concluded they couldn't defeat him with just a few bullets. She knew the undead's weakness was to shatter its head, but the man would be aware of that. Adi fired another shot, but the bullet bounced off his head. The man felt disappointed when Adi figured it out, and was surprised by how knowledgeable she was about magic. He explained that he had become curious about strange occurrences in the area, so he came to investigate. The castle had remained unchanged for 300 years, but strange things had been happening for the past 30 years, such as the sea splitting and powerful yet peculiar strangers appearing. He found it exciting to witness. Suddenly, Harold remembered Varen. The man revealed that he had discovered how to make golems and needed bones as materials. Harold realized that the man was behind the superstition and the disappearance of cats, dragging them to the sea. The man then shared that remodeling the castle was not the best part. He had turned it into a fortress made of bones. As the trio became confused, the castle began to shake. They noticed it was moving, and Harold had an idea. The man confirmed that he had renovated the castle with bones and bone powder, transforming it into a huge golem that he could control. As the castle golem moved, the man laughed, declaring his intention to annihilate everyone. He planned to build an even stronger fortress with more bones and have fun in the outside world. Human-sized puppets, which he claimed to have refined for strength, appeared. He wasn't worried about them being destroyed since he could rebuild them. Adi confirmed that the smaller golems were resilient and could be rebuilt as many times as the necromancer wanted. Harold sensed her worries, and he believed the man was indeed a dangerous enemy. The puppets attacked them, and Harold fought back, but they kept getting rebuilt. Adi tried to hit the necromancer with shots, but they bounced off his head. Harold worried as he felt the castle moving closer to the island. The enemies were tough, and his spear was reaching its limits. Seeing Adi and Anna helpless, Harold realized they couldn't let the necromancer continue his actions. Continuing the fight with the puppets, Harold recalled that Varen was on the island and would have noticed the castle if they failed to stop the necromancer. However, it might be too late, as it might cause casualties first. He wondered how they could stop the necromancer when his spear was already breaking. Harold thought of using his spear technique to wipe out the puppets along with the necromancer. However, he promised Adi that he wouldn't use it again. At that moment, he heard Adi scream and found her caught by the puppets. The necromancer then said he was fed up with their side and decided to finish things. Suddenly, the floor rose up, turning into walls to trap Harold. The necromancer vowed to make good use of their bodies, especially Adi's, as the puppets began to touch her. Seeing Adi's disgusted face, Harold got angry and gripped his spear tightly. Adi reminded him of his promise not to use the technique again, making the necromancer scared. Harold, with all his strength, hurled his spear like the arrow of the sun god. The necromancer froze in place. Later, Harold woke up on the ship, realizing they had won. He sighed, knowing he had worried Adi again. He noticed his eyesight was distorted, with everything appearing white on the right and black on the left. He wondered if it was from using his ability again and new symptoms would appear. He understood he couldn't always use it, fearing it might cost him his life next time. He questioned why his father was never harmed when using the technique, realizing his father was right that Harold couldn't control it. He regretted not asking his father to teach him better. Adi peeked through the door, concerned about Harold's well-being. He assured her he was fine, and she tearfully asked if he had used the last resort he mentioned before. She now understood its danger and begged him not to use it again, reminding him of his promise. Harold agreed, feeling like a scolded husband who didn't want to risk his life. He asked Adi to update him on the details. Back at the underwater castle, Adi and Anna were shocked to find the puppets broken and a big hole in the walls. Adi said everything had worked out and the castle, along with the necromancer, had vanished. She reminded Anna about meeting up again to say thanks. At the beach later, Shabani and Anna were happy to see Adi and Anna back. They whispered to each other before thanking them. Harold said he hadn't done much. They said their island was safe thanks to him, and Harold couldn't help but feel pleased. Anna and Shabani signaled each other, confusing Harold and Adi. They went behind a rock, and Harold was surprised to see them pull out a maid doll from nowhere. Shabani said it was a gift for him. Harold worried because the doll looked human, But on closer look, it was a finely crafted doll resembling a human. Anna had planned to give him a big pearl, but Shabani suggested the doll. They just smiled and Harold agreed to accept it, though Adi was concerned. Soon Balestia sailed off, and the island cats bid farewell to their visitors. Harold and Adi returned to their room and saw Anna waving goodbye from outside before leaving. They smiled at each other and decided to do something. Later, the gift from Shabani and Anna came to life. Harold was surprised. The doll asked where she was, and Harold felt uneasy seeing it talk and move. She noticed Harold and Adi and asked who they were. That is the end of the recap. Please read the pinned comment about the next part.